Violence and looting is raging through parts of South Africa. We've witnessed scenes of people stealing food, goods and burning buildings, among other just frustrating things that we have witnessed. The South African Federation of Trade Unions, that's the General Secretary, its Secretary General, that's Zwelinzima Vavi, says the real issue in the country is hunger and poverty. He says back in 2012, they warned that unemployment is a ticking time bomb. Mr. Vavi joins us now to talk to us about what he is seeing, and he's going to try and make sense of it for us. Mr. Vavi, I hope you don't mind. I didn't bring you here as the General Secretary of SAFTU, which is what you are now. I want to take you back to your role as former COSATU General Secretary. But before we get into that, just your brief comments about two provinces, Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, reduced to lawlessness in a matter of days. In your considered view, what has allowed for this to happen?
Well, there was clearly a spark. There was clearly a grouping inside the ANC which mobilized in protest against the incarceration of the former President Jacob Zuma. So there was a spark. There were people who clearly agitated, and I suspect it is part of those people that would have gone to ban 20 trucks in Mooi River the very next day. So there is a spark. And there's also a spark about the looting. There clearly some coordination somewhere of a few people who are invading the malls and storming them with the purpose of inspiring the rest of society to do the same. And I think that those that are beginning to put together an evidence to support that narrative are correct.
Yeah.
We have seen in the process very irresponsible public statements, agitation at street corners by very known individuals, openly inciting for violence, destruction of property, destruction of infrastructure, which is seemingly coordinated in a desperate attempt to register their unhappiness at that the former president have been arrested. But the point that we are making is this, that so many people have joined in the looting.
Yeah.
So many young people in particular, and women, both in KwaZulu-Natal and here, is a reflection of what we warned ages ago. That unless we can address in particular the crisis, a worsening crisis as affecting the women and their children, the youth, in particular in society, but in general terms, black people, we will be at some point have to face a powder keg.
Yeah.
And it is that powder keg that is imploding in South Africa generally.
Well, before we talk about that powder keg that you've long warned about, some people listening to you are going to say, well, if we are talking and taking you back to your role as former General Secretary of COSATU, then we have got to have an honest conversation, and if we are to have one that is candid, you're going to have to account for your role in the crisis that we are seeing. If you were to be told to account, what would you say were some of the things that you were responsible for, and which brings us to where we are today?
Well, COSATU was clearly wrong in its response to the 2005 moment, when it invoked conspiracy theory, when it in particular sought to blame the former President Thabo Mbeki as being the instigator of a conspiracy to stop Jacob Zuma from ascending to the highest position inside the ANC and therefore in the government. And COSATU believed in this theory, and perhaps it was made easy for them to do so because they were generally unhappy about the leadership of President Thabo Mbeki, the fact that he, together with Comrade Nelson Mandela, would have rammed down neoliberalism here on the throats of workers and declared that all of that was not negotiable. He would have handled a crisis in Zimbabwe in a manner that, in our view, simply gave authority to the Zimbabwean authorities to brutalize the trade unions there. There were many things that we were not happy about.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those very few, by the way, who have come out in public to say my apologies 1,000,000 times as a person who was the General Secretary of the Federation, even though mandated, fully mandated by not one Congress, but by successive national congresses of COSATU. But I now can see very clearly, with the benefit of hindsight, that that was absolutely wrong, and that this is what perhaps have laid the seeds of people defying the authority of the courts today by invoking the same conspiracy authorities, the conspiracy theories that we would have invoked in 2005. And I've apologized over and over. The problem here, Tony, is that once in South Africa you come out and acknowledge and take responsibility in public, the whole thing will be blamed on you and the other one or two other people who have done the same. And the people who would have really caused the damage, and let me tell you, the people who caused the damage, in my view, are those that even when they saw right from the beginning of 2009, 2010 in particular, that things were going astray away from what Polokwane resolutions were about, but kept on choosing to push their heads under the sand and refused to at least speak to the president then to say, hold on, this, what you are doing is going to hollow the state institutions, is going to collapse the ANC itself, is going to divide the trade union movement as it has done, is going to weaken the Youth League, is going to hollow even institutions of states such as intelligence. And all of those things are unfortunately happening. I'm one of those, at least with all of my baggages of having been part of the COSATU, but I'm one of those that have gone to the president when it was still appropriate and possible to do so, to lay out my concern. And I didn't only do so privately with him, but I went out in public over and over again to say we are going to the opposite of what Polokwane was about. Polokwane was always about decent work, was about ensuring that we introduce the national health insurance and address the health crisis in the public institutions, was about overhauling our education system, was about ensuring that we address the lead crisis, was about fighting crime and corruption in the state and outside. And when that didn't happen, I didn't mince my word. I went out in public over and over. Before I know it, I became the victim inside the COSATU family and in the alliance as a whole.
All right, Mr. Vavi, thank you very much for owning up. I'm going to ask you when we return to just keep your answers short. We have quite a bit to get through. We continue the conversation in a moment. Very good morning to you once again. If you're just joining us, we are in conversation with Zwelinzima Vavi, the former General Secretary of COSATU. Mr. Vavi, as requested, please keep it short. Did you ever think that there will ever come a day, with the many court cases that he's been through, I'm talking about former President Jacob Zuma, did you ever think that we would see a moment where he's actually taken to jail?
Look, the president mobilized us on the basis that he was not guilty of taking any bribe from the arms manufacturing company Tails. And he mobilized us that all of these other charges were frivolous and that they were part of the broader conspiracy. And we believed him, and that's the point that I was making. We believe that surely he could have not agreed to compromise the whole revolution by taking a 500,000 rands bribe. But let me tell you where he lost me. He lost me at the point where he wanted to stop the state from securing that type of an evidence from Mauritius, and he went to court to try and do that. He lost me at a time when he, instead of feeling vindicated by the so-called tapes that were where the evidence was, proving that there were people plotting about him. Instead of him saying, we will let them come out, he went to every court to try and stop those spy tapes from coming out in public. It was already before that I knew that we had been taken for a ride. Well before that, I knew that we were being taken for a ride. And when I stopped believing in that, I didn't hide inside COSATU. And I remember very vividly in March of 2010, I made a statement that you will never, ever see me accompanying anybody accused of corruption to any court of law. And I've stuck to that because at that moment, I knew that we have been taken for a ride.
So in short, you're saying this moment where he today sits in a jail cell in escort prison, you're saying that it was eventually going to come?
Look, if you can't defend yourself against the allegation that you have taken a 500,000 and instead you go to court to stop that from coming from Mauritius to South Africa, then you have something to hide. If you go to every court of law, when you have told us that you want your day in court and we defended your rights on the basis that you mustn't be trialed through media and that you must have your day in court, and suddenly you do everything not to go to court, and in order to disprove the allegations against you, then you have something to hide.
Let's talk then about the powder keg that you referred to. And that powder keg, as you often would say as General Secretary at that time, in the many press conferences that I attended, you warned about this army of young people, as you put it, who one day would become a problem for the country. And those very young people today are in the majority the ones who are doing the looting. Yesterday I had a conversation with Gwede Mantashe, the chairperson of the ANC, and I said to him, I asked him the question whether South Africa is seeing or nearing its own signal of the Arab Spring. And I just want you to have a listen to what he said when he responded to this question.
It is a desire by a number of journalists, but it's not a reality. The reality is there is unrest in KZN and Gauteng. There is no arrest in 7 provinces of the country. Now, what is the preoccupation? It should be to contain the unrest in those 2 provinces and ultimately eliminate it. If we succeed in that, the dream of an Arab Spring, I'm sure it will be called South African Spring, will remain a dream, because there are many who desire for some Arab Spring and overthrow of government and all those things. That's why your preamble is failure of economic policies of the ANC. And what you are not analyzing, which we will require another day, For example, what you always call middle class bulge, which is the first growth of black middle class, you have never done analysis of that. What is it? Is it a failure or a success?
What do you make of that response, Mr. Vavi? Very briefly, please.
He's on denial, and he's on denial. Of course, there's some truth on the fact that this looting have only been contained into 2 provinces, and that there may be some truth in the conspiracy theory that says it was because of the proximity between the 2 provinces, it was possible for the instigators to run between them and cause the mayhem that we have seen. So I don't want to dispute that. But what I want to dispute is this usual denial on the part. You know, my warning to Gwede Mandashe is that he will see that poverty, unemployment, inequality, corruption are a threat to this country the day that the poor will stand in front of his gates and rip off that Bosasa installed security fence in his own house and in demand of food in his refrigerator and his clothes. That's when you will realize that these levels of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. And the reason why he's on denial about that is because he still doesn't want to admit at this moment that the ANC government, through its austerity program and before that, its neoliberal approaches to development, have simply dismally failed, in particular black people in this country, but with a focus on its youth and women, who are the face of the brand of neoliberalism.
All right.
And austerity.
Mr. Vavi, unfortunately, I have to wrap this up very quickly, please. President Cyril Ramaphosa, is he handling this matter the correct way, in your view, this situation?
Hopeless. Hopeless. I mean, people are inciting violence on social media openly. People are addressing crowds, openly calling for the destruction of malls and infrastructure. No response from our security. And I must admit that this has to do with the history. If you read the high-powered report of Sid Mufamadi about what is happening in the intelligence community in South Africa and how they have been ravaged by factionalism, then you will understand why they have no capacity to respond. The response have been absolutely disastrous. The police are outnumbered. The soldiers are not well equipped. We're told that they are being given R5s with only 2 rounds inside. There is no bullets left in South Africa because the state have been hollowed out for 10 years and they did nothing to address that. So the response have been absolutely pathetic and disaster. But more importantly, Kolani, they are not even acknowledging that the reason why women and children have joined into the looting is because they, amongst others, have just stopped paying 350 rands of these grants to the poor in the middle of a time when they were moving the country to level 4. Irresponsible action, and then refuse to take consequences of that. Absolutely disaster from the government, indeed.
Zwelinzima Vavi, former General Secretary of COSATU, and of course right now he leads SAFTU, which is an offspring, if you like, of COSATU. And that's where we're going to leave it with Zwelinzima Vavi. Thank you very much for your time.